Hello everyone, today's screencast is going to be on fractions, percentages and decimals. Hopefully it's going to be an absolute fantastic one, I'm sure it will be, and we're going to go on really quickly. Now I am going to move on, really try and do it as quick as I can, because we are going to look at quite a few things. We're going to look at how to convert fractions into decimals into percentages, hence why we're bringing up this little picture here. We're going to convert between all of them, but they're all the same value, that's the important thing. We're then going to look at how we find a decimal of an amount, which is also like a fraction of an amount or a percentage of an amount, okay? So that's also going to come into play. But for a start, we're going to look at a couple of different things when it comes to these fractions. So let's look at the fractions. This is the top tip, can I turn this bottom number into 100? Well, I can do. If I times it by 10 and I times it by 10, they end up with 30 over 100. Now, that's the easiest way to do these. So if I look at this next one down here, then I can turn 5 into 100. I can turn 25 into 100. If I can't do that, then I can always just use either common knowledge, so know your fractions, know what 1/2 is, know what 1/3 is, or you can use just the bus stop method division as well, which we'll go over at a later date. But anyway, let's have a look at this first one. So I've made this into 30 over 100, haven't I? Well, what would 30 over 100 be as a decimal? It would be 30 divided by 100. So you can even see we didn't even need to do that on this one, because we could have gone and said 3 divided by 10 would be, as a decimal, would be 0.3. Do we understand that? That we have 3. If we divide it by 10, then obviously often people talk about the decimal point shifting, but actually the numbers are moving to the right in the decimal place, so it stays in the same place. But whatever way you want to think about it, we are going to get that decimal from here to there. Now, that as a percentage, I like to think of it in here. What if you got 30 marks out of 100? Hopefully you'd realize that you got 30% of the paper right. Now, no one in my class would ever get 30 out of 100, I'm sure. But if you did, that's what you'd have. So let's use that information now. We've done this over here. We didn't need to, but we did 30 out of 100. It really helps us. So let's make this fraction into, so we've got the bottom number as 100. What would we do to the 5? We'd times it by 20, wouldn't we? So 5 timesing by 20 would get us to 100. So therefore, we need to do the same thing to the top. So we're going to times the top and the bottom by 20, and we're going to end up with 40 out over 100, and that's 40%. What's percentages as a decimal? Well, if we divide them by 100, we'll get the decimal. If we have a decimal and we times them by 100, we'll have the percentage as well. So we're going to divide by 100 to get us 0.4 or 0.4. And the last one here, this 2 over 25, what would I do to get it to 100? I would times it by 4, so I'm going to times the top and the bottom by 4, and that's going to get me 8 over 100. So 8 over 100, 8 out of 100, we can think of it as a percentage, or we can divide it. I'd end up with 0.08 or 8%. Okay, so there we go. This is working with fractions and working in this way. Now I didn't put this one here, so that's 40 over 100 there, isn't it? So we can clearly see them as we go through. Now if we're working the other way, I think we're going to start with 0.45, yep. Then we can think about that and say, okay, I'm going to multiply it by 100 to get me 45%. Remember, I'm going to divide by 100 to get me 0.45. And always our starting point is, okay, we could always think of it as 45 over 100. So we can write that down, and then we can scale it down from there. And if we scaled it down, we'd end up with 9 over 20. That would take a little bit of time, but that's what we would do. Both divisible by 5, aren't they? So let's look at this one now. We're going to move from 50%. Remember, I'm going to divide by 100 to get me 0.5. And I'm going to start with 50 over 100 because I've got 50 marks out of 100. And that would end up being scaled down to, hopefully you will know, we've got 1/2, don't we? 50 over 100 is 1/2. So we're motoring on, aren't we? We're motoring on now. We're going to move on to this point 19. Remember, what are we going to do? We're going to times by 100, and that gets us 19%. And then what's 19% as a fraction? Would be 19 out of 100. And believe it or not, we can only scale that down, I think. No, I don't think we can scale that down. So it'd be 19 over 100. And last but not least, we've got our 5%. This is often where people go wrong. They say, oh, 5% is 0.5. Well, that'd be 50%. So remember, we've got to divide by 100. Divide by 100 to get 0.5. And we would make it 5 out of 100, or it would become 1 over 20. Hopefully that will make some sense. You actually might need to watch that a couple of times if that doesn't make sense, but I wanted to go through nice and quickly so those people who found that easy weren't stationary for too long. So we're going to move on now to how do we work out what a percentage of something is. And it's really important that we understand. We could now get a question which is, what would be a fraction of an amount, and we could still work it out. We've done that in past ones, but we haven't done a percentage of an amount. So what we do very simply is I use the lattice method. You can use another method if you'd like, but try and use the lattice method. The more you use it, the easier it'll get. And we put it down as its decimal. So we say it's 24 timesing by 0.12, or 12. It's 12%, isn't it? 0.12 is 12%. All we've done is converted it. And then we're going to work it through the lattice method. So I'm going to say 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 4 is 8. And 2 times 2 is 4. Remember what I do on the lattice method. I've got to collect up all the value of all of my columns. So I can see I've got a value of 8 here. I've got a value of 8 here. And I've got a value of 2 here. So we can see there that I've got 288. Is that my answer? 288. 288. It's not, is it? So I've got to put this decimal place in. So I'm going to roll this down here and put it here. So therefore I've got 2.88. Another way to look at it is, in the question, how many numbers after decimal place? I've got 2 numbers after decimal place here. So therefore in my answer there'll be 2 numbers after decimal place there. So the next one is, and we've got a whole new slide for you to do next, so do not worry, but I'm going to do this one with you. So I've got 43 timesing by, what is 22% as a decimal? It's 0.22. So we're going to times it by 0.22 there. And then we're going to work it through, aren't we? 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8. All right, so you can see here we've got 6 on this one. And what have we got here? We've got 14. So I just carry over here. You can carry over in other locations, but I'm going to work that one through. And then where do I put the decimal place? I roll it down and it goes just there. So my answer would be 9.46. And there we have it. So those are my two. Now I'm going to throw these next two over to you. Just exactly the same. I'm even going to draw out the lattice method for you. So you've got 365 timesing by 0.29. And on the bottom one, you've got 242 timesing by 0.03. So you work those ones through, you find out your answers, you come back and see if you've got them correct. Okie dokie, everyone. Let's work on the top one here. We've got 5 timesing by 2 is 10. 2 timesing by 6 is 12. 2 timesing by 3 is 6. 9 timesing by 5 is 45. 9 timesing by 6 is 54. 9 timesing by 3 is 27. I'm going to collect up all my value of all my columns here. This one's going to be quite challenging for some of you, but hopefully you'll get there. We've got 5. We've got 8. I've got 7 and 5 is 12. 13, 14, 15. So I've got 15 there. I've got 1, 2, 8, 10, and then 1 there. So look where my decimal place goes. It rolls down here and it goes, and it is equals 105.85. All right, so this next one, we're going to go and say, well, that's 0, isn't it? And that's 0, and that's 0. And then we've got 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 2 is 6. Work through, I've got 6 here, I've got 2 there, I've got 7, I've got nothing and nothing. So I roll my decimal place down and I end up with equaling 7.26. So hopefully you did that really well. If you haven't seen the video on the lattice method, highly recommend going and watching that one. Won't win an Oscar or anything like that, but it'll definitely help you with these types of questions. If you want to use your own method, you absolutely can use your own method. Just remember, my top tip is to just take away the decimal place and then put it back at the end. So your one would be 365 timesing by 29. Just make sure you put your decimal place back at the end. But it is time now for the quiz. There's some quite challenging ones here ahead of you. So I would just tell you this one here, you're going to need to use either common sense, which we can scale this one down to 1/3, and then know your fraction, or you're going to have to use division to help you through that. On this question here, 120%, I'm going to give you a little bit of a helping hand. It's 1.2 as a decimal, so it'd be 1.2 timesing by 95, wouldn't it? So just remember those two little tips. Everything else should be fine. So give it a go, come back and see if you've got it correct. If you get this stuff wrong, it just means, especially on this section here, just means you need to go back and watch that video a few times. Pause it, really sort of soak up the information. But it will be there for you and it is accessible. But anyway, pause the video, give it a go, come back and see if you've got it. Just bob on. Okay, so let's go through the answers now. I can't remember how I've done this. It's been a while since I created this PowerPoint. Here we go. So we've got, for our fraction, we've got 50% or 0.5 and a half, don't we? Now this one was 0.33 recurring and 33.3%. 75% here, we've got 0.75 or 3/4 because we would have started with 75 over 100. On this one, we've got our 40% or our 0.4, and that's 10 over 25. Going through, I'm sure you can work out all the rest of them. And there we go. On the percentage questions, we had 0.12 times by 35, which equaled 4.2 or £4.20. And then we had 120%, which was 1.2 times by 95, and that gave us £114. Okay, everyone, hopefully you've done fantastically well. As I always say, I'm sure you have. If you've done well, write a nice revision card on this question and work through it. That's the most important thing. Never give up. Never say you can't do something. This is a little bit tricky. I understand that. There's a lot to take in, but you can get there if you work hard. Until next time, it's been a real pleasure helping you with your maths today. Enjoy whatever you're going to do next.